All right, sorry I couldn't be there today, but I wanted to record a lesson for you so that you can proceed with the next section. We'll have time tomorrow to answer a few more questions, but I need you to really work hard at this today to see if you can get all of the reasons and parts filled in. What we're going to work on today is fill in some partially completed proofs. Yesterday we looked at a proof as being a sequence of ideas, and so you need to keep in mind that this is a sequence of things. If we know this fact, then what have we studied? What definition or theorem or postulate, for instance, or property have we studied that can help us come up with a new conclusion from what we started with? So we're going to go through a couple things. First, I want you to grab the Introduction to Proofs worksheet. This is a worksheet that I want you to work on for a while right now, and then you will finish it up as your assignment. I'm thinking it might take you like 20 minutes or so, and I'm not sure if you want to spend all that time right now in class doing it, but you do need to do part of it to get the idea before we go on to the rest of the lesson. So I'm going to keep it on this screen for quite a while you are looking at the worksheet. Okay, on the worksheet, the first statement says measure of angle 1 equals measure of angle 2. That's what was given. Now I need you to think about, what does that mean if the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2? If we think about the definition of congruent angles, two angles are congruent if and only if their measures are equal. Well, since we have two angles whose measures are equal, we should be able to say angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, and the reason is definition of congruent angles. Angle 1 congruent to angle 2, definition of congruent angles for number 1. Okay, on number 2, measure of angle 1 plus measure of angle 5 equals 90 degrees is what you're given. Okay, what do we know based on that? Well, basically that equation is giving me two angles that add together to be 90 degrees. Hopefully your mind is clicking. Oh, we did complementary angles. So if I use the definition of complementary angles, that goes in the right-hand box because that's the reason. Angle 1 and angle 5 are complementary is what you would write in the left-hand side. That's the statement that we can come up with. So on number 2, angle 1 and angle 5 are complementary, and the reason is definition of complementary angles. So we're thinking about what was given and seeing what we can come up with. I'll do one more with you before I let you work on your own. Number 3. It says angle 1 and angle 7 form a linear pair. Okay, we had a definition for linear pair and we had a theorem about linear pairs. So which one's going to allow us to come up with something? Well, if you look back at the definition, it just tells you that they are adjacent and they form a line. That really doesn't give us much of anything. If you look at the linear pair theorem, and if you need a summary of the theorems, page S82 would be where all the theorems start in our textbook. But otherwise, get your notes out from chapter 1 and chapter 2. Okay, just the other day, linear pair theorem said if two angles form a linear pair, then they are supplementary. So you should be able to, on the left, have the statement angle 1 and angle 7 are supplementary. The justifying reason is the linear pair theorem. Okay, now that we know that they're supplementary, what could we come up with based on that? Well, if you know your definition of supplementary angles, we should be able to get the statement measure of angle 1 plus measure of angle 7 equals 180 degrees. And the justifying reason is definition of supplementary angles. So that's the type of thing you're doing on this worksheet, taking the fact that was given and then thinking, what can I come up with based upon what we've studied in chapter 1 or 2, You come up with a new statement and write down what definition or theorem or postulate or property you are using in order to support that. Okay, so pause your iPad, work on this worksheet for maybe 10 minutes, and then start me back up so that we can actually do the rest of the lesson for today. Okay, I'm disappearing for a while. Okay, so now if you've turned me back on, we'll proceed. You should be getting the idea from that introduction to proofs worksheet that you have to think about what the statement says, think about what things we've studied, look at your notes on the back of the book to give you some ideas, and then come up with new statements. Okay, when we do proofs, this is the process that we're going through. Okay, the hypothesis is what you are given to begin with. Then you can use definitions, postulates, properties, or theorems to generate your new ideas. And we're trying to arrive at a conclusion. That in a proof is stated as what you're trying to prove in the directions. So acceptable proof reasons, there are 5 of them. Given information, what is stated as given or what is evident in the picture, and any definition, postulate, property, or theorem that we have studied up to this point. So one thing we need to watch out for, when a specific theorem is being proven, you can't use that same theorem to prove that theorem. So that'll show up once in a while. Be sure you read directions, because it might say prove part of the vertical angle theorem. Well, then that should tell you you cannot use the vertical angle theorem in that proof. There are other ideas that would support it. Okay, so if you haven't done so yet, get out your notes from chapter 1 and 2 so that you can look some things up. Also, I mentioned page S82 at the back of your book is a summary of our theorems and postulates, I think. All right, so here's the first example. You need to write this down in your notes so that you would have some sample problems. And notice we are given that angle A and B are supplementary, and we're also given that measure of angle A equals 45 degrees. All of that, when you put it down into the 2-column proof, would be supported by given. Now in this problem, I didn't say prove measure of angle B because it didn't really sound right. So I just said find the measure of angle B. That's our goal. So here's some steps. Number the statement and number the reason. Sometimes you can put the given in 2 separate parts or 3 separate parts. I just decided to put it all at one time for this problem. Okay, now I'm thinking about what I'm given. And I notice it talked about angle A and B being supplementary. Okay, clicks in my mind. Supplementary means 2 angles that add to be 180. So that's my statement, that those 2 angles measures add to be 180. What's my justifying reason? Definition of supplementary angles. And I put step 1 just to tell you I thought about something from step 1 to come up with this. Okay, now the next line I'll show you. How did I get that? Compare line 2 and line 3. Notice they're pretty much the same kind of thing, something plus angle B equals 180, but I changed from line 2, it had the notation M angle A, and now it has 45 degrees there in its place. In its place. Did that give you a clue? Substitution property. How do I know that measure of angle A and 45 are the same? Look in line 1. It tells you that fact. Okay, so now I've got it substituted. Let's do some simplifying. What did I do to get that? Subtracted 45 from each side. So subtraction property of equality. And notice I found what the measure of angle B is. So I have completed the proof for the first example. Pause and write down what you didn't have time for. On this one, again, write down in your notes so you have a sample. I have on the left-hand side told you what is given, what you're trying to prove, and there's a diagram there that you can use. I have the whole proof on the right-hand side. I set it up in a flowchart proof this time. Remember, the arrows show you how an idea leads to the next thing, and that leads to the next thing. So if you follow the arrows in a flowchart proof, it helps you follow the thinking sequence. Okay, now as you look at the flowchart proof, I want you to match up where are the given things in the flowchart proof. Okay, if you found those, the very first one on the left was given. Now I'm going to go to the one right below it because that's the thinking sequence. Okay, so if angle 2 and 3 are complementary, what's that mean? It means that they add up to 90. So what do we call that when it tells you the meaning of it? It's a definition. So that oval should say definition of complementary angles. Now I can't keep going in that thinking sequence to the right because it shows more things coming in. So let's go to the top of that next column. Where am I coming up with angle 1 congruent to angle 3? Look to the left. See, it's part of the given? And now think, what does that mean if angle 1 and 3 are congruent? It should mean they have equal measures. Definition of congruent angles. That's the definition, that's the meaning of congruent angles. Now notice at the next oval, it has 2 arrows coming into it, so we need both those facts. So I'm looking at the statement I'm trying to support. Measure of angle 2 plus measure of angle 1 equals 90 degrees. It almost looks like the one that's on the left, but instead of angle 3, it says measure of angle 1. Notice the bubble just above says that measure of angle 1 and 3 are the same. So what we did was we took out from that left hand angle 2 plus angle 3 equals 90. We took out the angle 3 and replaced it with measure of angle 1 because they're equal. Reason? Substitution, property of equality. Looks like I didn't put the whole title there. Okay, so now that we know 2 and 1 add to be 90, can we call them complementary? We should be able to. Meaning of the word, so definition of complementary angles. Now you might notice as you look at that flowchart proof that we did use the definition of complementary angles in there twice, and the statement that they were supporting looks different. Well, remember, definitions are biconditional, so you can go both ways. If we had the word complementary, we can come up with the equation. If we have the equation, we can come up with the word complementary. So definitions can be used both ways. Right, on this one, I gave you the plan, and I want you to write the 2-column proof. So this was a paragraph proof. You're going to turn it into a 2-column proof. Now I wish I could write on the board at the same time that you're looking at this, but can't do that. So you'll have to do some writing, and then the next screen will have all the solution, and you can see if what you wrote down matched up. All right, so what we are given is angle 1 and 2 are supplementary, and that angle 1 is congruent to 3. We're trying to get to the fact that angle 3 and 2 are supplementary. Now, if you give that some thought, to prove that they're supplementary, we need to show that their measures will add to be 180 degrees. So we're going to try and get to that. Okay, there's a plan for the proof. So on your paper, start your 2-column proof. Statements go on the left side, reasons go on the right side, and let's see what the plan tells us to do. It says use the definition of supplementary angles after part of the given information. So what part of the given information deals with supplementary? Write that on the left-hand side for your first line in your proof. So that should say, line 1, angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary. On the right-hand side, number 1, the reason, it was given. Now reading the plan again, it said use the definition of supplementary angles. So line 2, after you have that given information, line 2, what does it mean if they're supplementary? So on the left-hand side, you should be able to write an equation based on supplementary. Measure of angle 1 plus measure of angle 2 equals 180 degrees. Reason on the right-hand side for line 2, definition of supplementary angles. Okay, I'm reading the next sentence. Then use the given congruent angles, definition of congruent angles, and substitution to show something. Okay, so let's back up there. Use the given congruent angles. So line 3, from the given up above. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. Line 3's reason, given. Okay, line 4. Okay, that sentence says after the given, use definition of congruent angles. Okay, so your reason on the right-hand side will be definition of congruent angles for line 4. What's the statement going to be? If you have congruent angles, that means the measure of them are equal. So your line 4 statement on the left side should say M, measure of angle 1 equals measure of angle 3. Okay, reading that sentence again, it said definition of congruent angles and substitution. So now substitution property of equality is your reason on the right-hand side. I think we're at line 5. Now, where can we get measure of angle 3 plus measure of angle 2 equals 180? Well, look back at your proof. I think it's line 2 that you have measure of angle 1 and 2 equal 180. And then line 4 says measure of angle 1 equals measure of angle 3. Okay, so take out from line 2 is basically what we're doing. We're going to remove measure of angle 1 and in its place put measure of angle 3. So when we do that, write down what that new equation is going to say. And I think we're at line 5. So at line 5, your statement on the left would now say measure of angle 3 plus measure of angle 2 equals 180 degrees. We substituted measure of angle 3 in there instead of measure of angle 1 like line 2 said. Line 4 told us they were equal measures, so we can do the substituting. Okay, then it says finally, so here's your last line, by the definition of supplementary angles, that's your reason in the right-hand column. In the left-hand column for this last line, we should now be able to say angle 3 and angle 2 are supplementary. And that's what we were trying to prove, so we got to the end. Okay, here's what it looked like. Okay, now I noticed that this had all the given in the beginning. Okay, I should have looked ahead or changed the line by line. Okay, so that measure of angle 1 congruent to measure of angle 3 should be at line 3, and then everything moves down. Okay, so if you have questions about that, ask tomorrow. It was simply I didn't separate the given in my solution, but I did in the plan that I gave you. Sorry about that. Okay, here's a new proof. It says fill in the blanks to complete the 2-column proof. Okay, this is proving part of the congruent supplements theorem, so you cannot use congruent supplements theorem as a reason. The reasons will be something else to come up with what the congruent supplements theorem says eventually. Okay, so take some time, shut me off for a little while so that you can get down the given and what you're trying to prove and take a look at what you know and what this proof involves. Okay, if you've given it some thought, supplements, you should know the meaning of that. And we're trying to prove angle 1 congruent to angle 3. Well, to get two angles congruent, we usually have to get their measures equal. So that's what this proof is trying to do. Okay, I'm going to shrink it down a little bit so I have room to the right-hand side. Okay, first of all, what was given? And as I'm looking down through the reasons, there's only one given, and line 5, that's not in the given, that statement. So I think everything in the given needs to be written for line 1. Okay, then line 2, it said, so you have to think through every step, even if you don't have to fill in anything for line 2. You've got to think through it, otherwise the proof ideas are not going to go in sequence for you. Okay, so line 2 said the 1 and 2 add up to 180, the angles 2 and 3 add up to 180. We use the definition of supplementary angles based upon the fact that they gave us in the given. Okay. Now line 3 says use a substitution. The only equations we have now are what's at line 2. Now this substitution is kind of tricky. I'm going to show it to you. Okay, can you read that last part? It says angle 3. Okay, so what was done? Well, at line 2, I wrote down the same thing it started with, measure of angle 1 plus measure of angle 2 equals, but then I stopped. I'm going to take out that first 180 degrees and put something else that's equal to 180 degrees in its place. And that was simply measure of angle 2 plus measure of angle 3. So that's how I substituted in that problem. Number 4 is simply a reflexive property, because at line 5, what we're going to do, look at what that line 3 would have in it. Notice there's measure of angle 2 on each side. We're going to subtract measure of angle 2 from the left side and the right side of what was written on B, which would be line 3. So when you subtract those out, wouldn't you be left with measure of angle 1 equals measure of angle 3? And that's what line 5 has. So we did a subtraction to get there. And then the last statement, since we have measure 1 and 3 being equal, you should be able to get angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, supported by the definition of congruent angles. So the substitution on that one was a little bit different. Okay, here's another one I gave you a plan for. Write a 2-column proof. We're proving part of the congruent complements theorem. This is very much like the proof that you just did, but it's using complementary angles instead of supplementary angles. So use that last one as a good guide if you need to. Back this up and get to that proof again. The steps will be the same, the substitution, the subtraction, but it's using complementary angles adding up to 90 instead of adding up to 180. Okay, so stop this and see what you can do on this one. Follow the plan. All right, then here is what I came up with. Now the little 1s and 2s, I just told you which line I looked back to. But the given, those definitions, then we substituted to get it together. Put in that reflexive so that then we can subtract measure of angle 2 from each side. Technically that should be there to show you're subtracting the same thing from each side. Okay, when you're doing the diagrams of a proof, if there isn't a diagram, you need to make one that fits the given information. Mark only the given information on it. Don't mark what you're trying to prove, because if you do, you'll start using that as information that you were given. Sometimes I put like a dot or something if I'm trying to get some angles congruent so that I know where I'm headed. But mark only the given information. All right, here's another sample. Write a justification for each step. And we're given that measure of angle ABC is 90, and measure of angle 1 equals 4 times the measure of angle 2. In the end, we're supposed to come up with the measure of angle 2. I have all the statements there. You need to see if you can get the justifying reason for each one. Okay, you got to try it yourself. So stop the iPad and then start me back up when you're done. All right, here's what you had. Now that angle addition postulate, that's something that needs to come from your memory. But look at the picture. Angle 1 and angle 2 are adjacent angles, side by side, hooked together. That angle addition postulate said if you add the measure of those two small angles, you'll get the measure of a bigger angle, and that was angle ABC. It's substituted. To see what was substituted, look back up in line 1. We used line 2, we took out measure of angle 1 and put some other notation in its place, and instead of measure of angle ABC, we put 90 in its place. Line 4, combined like terms, and then just divided. All right, here's another one with a plan. Write the 2-column proof. Again, let's see what you can do. And this given information really doesn't appear in the proof. This picture has to come along with this one, so you probably won't even have a given in this sample. Now you might wonder which linear pair you want to work with. Look at what you're trying to prove. So if you can get 1 and 2 being a linear pair and 1 and 4 being a linear pair, that's probably going to help. Okay, here's what I had. Where did I come up with that? Well, looking at the picture, I can tell that those are a linear pair, and that linear pair theorem would tell me that they're supplementary. Then I showed the equations based on the definition of supplementary angles. And if you remember from those last 2 problems you did, that substitution, taking out that 180 in this case and replacing it, that'll get you to what you're trying to prove. That might have been kind of hard to get started. Okay, we made it to the end. So I want you to work on some problems out of the book. It's page 113, numbers 1 through 8. That has parts of the proof, and then you're filling in some missing things. In addition to those 8 problems out of the book from earlier in class period, you should have a Terms and Concepts Chapter 2 worksheet that you started as the bell ringer. That needs to get done. And the worksheet that we worked on, that Intro to Proof worksheet, make sure that that's complete. So finish up those 2 worksheets and then 8 problems from the book. All right, we'll see you tomorrow and talk about some things that you have questions about.